You know, I was complaining a bit that I had too much weight, which is true. I think next time I'm not gonna bring my seat, but since I have it, I'm glad I have it because it's super wet out here on these logs and stuff. So I got this little tripod camp seat thing. Steve's got some trail mix here.
Yes, sir.
Dave, what do you got there? Cliff bars? Cliff bars. Some more trail mix. I think I'm gonna have a granola bar and some applesauce I brought. And yeah, it's pretty nice around here.
And some energy.
Yeah, there you go. It's nature's 5-hour energy. So let's grab some of that river water from down there in that beautiful river. And we're gonna boil it up here with a little miniature pop can stove. So you see that there? All flaming away. And brew up some tea for me and the guys, alright? Look at that. Oh man. For all the pain, it's worth it for everything you get to see. What's that? We lose the trail? Oh, tree fed on it. So we are almost 2/3 of the way there, I believe. Steve said that it was like 2 o'clock now?
10 to 2.
10 to 2, it's like 10 to 2. And we're starting to see first signs of snow on the ground and frost. And last time we checked, we were at about 2 degrees still. You can see over here, there's some frost and snow on the ground. It's raining a bit, not really rain, it's more run down from the trees from the snow. And yeah, whew. All right. So it was Steve's really good idea to put on our bag covers because it is getting a little bit moist out here. So it's got a contractor bag. I cut a hole in for the straps on the pack. I'll probably use another bag for a poncho here. Some contractor bags, man, come in handy.
How you doing there, Josh?
Not good, but I'll make it.
Sick.
Oh my god.
We are definitely 2/3 of the way there. Well, you know, like inspirationally 2/3.
Okay. Good to hear.
And it looks like we're not far off course from the river. We're pretty much bang on it.
Good to hear.
Pretty decent.
Yeah.
We're not like way out.
And it's a good thing we put on these covers because it's raining and it's snowing at the same time. It's just falling slush. So pretty soon we're gonna be seeing a lot more
You filmed
snow.
that tree we had to go over? Film that stuff. It looks like a broken tree bush. Yeah, we had to go over that. And I'm like the shortest one in our family, so these guys are like whoop whoop whoop. I'm like climbing over it.
Ah, you're doing good.
So you can see we just hit some like hardcore, like not snow but snow on the ground. It's amazing how a few minutes of climbing, it's only been like a few minutes since checking if you last where we found that first patch of snow. Now it's pretty much everywhere. It's covered and getting a little bit slick up here, but it's pretty cool. It's Jay right here. He's got the first aid on, sun beaming off of him. It's looking like the Norwegian dream right there.
You guys are making this possible for me.
Holy! I just got my pants covered in snow. I got half a bum's wet. But that's alright. The rest of me is wet too, just from sweat. Yeah. Yeah, I brought some big dry clothes, thank goodness. So that's good.
Like Mount cover spots though?
Yeah, so you can see here we're.
Little mini hike itself, and it's like
I'm hoping we're close. It's getting pretty snowy though, pretty slick. We've been sliding everywhere, and our travel speed's definitely dropped because it's so slippery. And you gotta test the ground first, otherwise you're gonna fall through, break a foot or something. It's turned from a spring hike to a winter hike. Now what you don't really see here is the last quarter of the hike where things started to get pretty bad. We tried to remain in pretty good spirits, but all of us were pretty cold. Our clothes were completely soaked through, and a few times we thought we'd made it to the lake, but it wasn't the lake. The most notable time, we got up to this sort of clearing, and we could see what we thought was the lake stretching out in front of us, and all frozen and glazed over. And Steve was kind of leading the way up front, and he stops us, and he's like, "Guys, no, the lake's up here, we made it." And we're all really super happy and ecstatic, and we're like, "Yes, finally, after like trekking up this freaking mountain, we've made it." And the trail sort of started deteriorating because the snow was on it, and fewer people go that high. So we've gone down from about maybe 3 feet to about halfway. You got down to about 2 feet across the space that your feet can travel on for the path, down to maybe like 1.5 feet. And then that's covered with snow as well, so it's slick. And then on your side going down was a 45-degree drop, all covered in snow, super slick. So it's getting pretty sketchy up there. And our travel speed dropped tremendously. We were moving maybe marker to marker, so it was about 30 feet, and then we completely winded, all of us huffing and puffing and needing a break. Then we trek on another 30 feet, huffing and puffing. So the first 3 quarters took us about 3 hours, maybe 3.5 hours, and then the last quarter took us 2 hours because it was just, the travel conditions were so horrible. And sort of swing back to the lake story thing. So we thought we made it to the lake, and we get there and our eyes sort of adjust to what we thought was this brilliant glowing lake, and it's actually just the sky, and what we were looking at was a cliff just dropping off the edge, and we're like, whoa man, like, this is a cliff. And so we kind of backed away from that, and we're like, okay, I guess we have to go, keep going back up the trail. So we get back on the trail, keep heading back up, and it's just, we keep thinking, we have to keep pushing, and it's about 3:45 or so, and we're still not at the lake, and there's no way we can camp out where we are because basically there's no even ground. It's just 45 degrees of mountain with trees around us, small little path. It would be very hard to camp out there. I mean, I guess if you had hammocks to hang like Steve did, we could do some hammocks or something like that, but we weren't really prepared for that kind of terrain to camp in, at least. So we knew we needed to find some flat ground and camp out there. So we keep pushing on, and finally about 4 o'clock we get to the top of the mountain, and we get to this clearing. Well, this wasn't the top of the mountain, but it was a clearing where the lake began. That was about 1,300 meters above sea level. We were pretty close to where we thought the lake would be, and when I checked it later, the lake was only 500 meters away, so it was really close, and we were very disappointed we didn't make it to the lake, but we were super ecstatic that we found a place we could camp at, possibly. When we got there, it was just covered in snow. We were up to about 5 feet of snow off the ground, so super snowy everywhere. We get there, we kind of have a little bit of a break, eat some granola bars and some chocolate and stuff like that, and immediately I start to cool off. I'm super cold, super chilly. I checked the thermometer, and we're at -2 degrees Celsius, so it's pretty cold. I asked my brother and my cousin if they, if they had any change of clothes, and they're like, "Oh, we didn't bring a change of clothes. Like, we didn't think it'd be like this wet out." And the wetness, the dampness, was mostly from our own sweat, not from the the rain or anything like that. So I'm like, what? Like, you guys didn't bring any clothing to change into? And they're like, no, man, I didn't bring any clothes. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, 'cause I'm in my wet clothes and I'm freezing, and I can imagine what they're feeling like. And basically, we kind of went into survival mode there, and we're just like, okay, if we can't get a fire going, and we can't get it sustained, we have to basically get down off the mountain as fast as we can. Basically, within half an hour, we had to get a fire going, and if not, I guess by 4:30, before we lost the sun, get down to a warmer elevation and then camp out down there. But all of us were so exhausted that I don't think we could travel very far. When we got there, our legs were all jelly, and it was pretty hard. So none of us really wanted to leave that site and hike back down the mountain. We wanted to try to stay there at least. So we had Dave and Josh chopping down this standing dead tree we had that we found there, because that was basically the only source of wood up there because it's so snowy. Going up there was supposed to be, when I checked by Google Maps, +7 in the day, -7 in the night at the site, and it never rose there to +7 at all. It was always at least 1 degree below zero when we were there. So definitely it was more snow than we were expecting. I was expecting maybe, you know, a foot of snow that had permafrosted up there, and be able to still dig and stuff for trees, or dig for sticks to burn, and you know, be able to make a proper fire on the ground. But yeah, that didn't happen. So we had Steve at his site, and he set up sort of a little place where he could hang his hammock, making a fire. And then I go to talk to Josh and Dave, and I'm like, hey guys, like, I think it would be best if we clear this area over here and set up our shelters. And then Josh and Dave were both like, dude, like, we thought you brought the shelter. And I'm like, what? I'm like, no man, like, I brought like a big tarp to keep the rain off our heads, but it's not a shelter, it's just a 10 by 10, like, there's no side covering, and we probably wouldn't fit into it, or anything like that. So yeah, they didn't have any shelter at all, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, we're freezing cold. There's a little bit of wind chill factor. At the moment, it was still 4 o'clock, but -2 degrees Celsius. We don't even know if we can get a fire started. We don't think we can travel back down the mountain because we're so exhausted. So our basic course of action was build a shelter first, because we didn't know if we'd get fire, and then after that, try to make a fire in front of the shelter. And at the same time, Steve was making a secondary fire in front of his shelter. So I looked around, and the terrain was still pretty steep. It was basically a flat path where we were, and there's like a V of snow, a snow valley you'll kind of see. And the only place I could really set up the tarp, the 10 by 10, was on one of the snowbanks. And I had nothing really to dig with, so I just had my knife. And I started digging away with that long, large knife, digging the snow. And I dug for a long time. I'm pretty sure it was probably about half an hour, 45 minutes, something like that, to be able to clear enough space out. And it's basically just using it as a pickaxe, cutting through the snow, and then kicking out with my foot. So I did that, and I kind of made a little nest where we could sit in. I had the 10 by 10 stretched out over on top of that. Used some 550 paracord, attached that to the 2 trees I could find. And then I only had these sort of plastic garbage bags, which were supposed to be sort of like under tarps, sort of thing. I guess ground tarps, to keep the ground from moisture from leaching into our sleeping area. So I brought those up for the guys, but that's all we had to make any walls. So basically, there's no sticks up there, and no rocks or anything, so I had to chisel off pieces of bark and use that, and tuck it inside the tarp, and then tie some 550 cord around that to sort of pinch it in, make a little button, and then throw that onto the trees. And then I knew we had to get off the ground, off the snow, because it was going to be super cold and it was going to suck all our heat out, and it would probably make our sleeping bags pretty wet. So I cut down some evergreen billows, made a little bundle bed under there, and got some foam pads on the top of that. And then I had the SOL, Survival Outdoor Longer, not the Survival Bivy, but the Survival Tarp. So we stuck that under for our a little bit of ground reflection. And that was actually really warm. That kept us nice and warm with just the pine billows, and then the a little bit of foam and the mylar tarping. But of course, that was supposed to be for one person, for myself to sleep on, and basically we had to make 3 full-grown men sleep on that. And my brother, he's like 6'3", so he's a pretty big guy. I'm about 5'10", and then my cousin's probably 6 foot, something like that. So we're pretty, decently tall people. And we had to kind of basically bundle up in the width of the Mylar instead of in the length of it. So I'm sleeping there, and I have my sort of head up above the snow, and I have a little bit of a pillow behind me, and I have my knees arched. I'm kind of crouched up in there. That's how we slept. And before that, I get the shelter all set up, and they're still chopping wood, still feeding Steve his fire. And I'm like, okay, I've got shelter now. I've got to focus on fire, get this going. And basically, I found 2 large sticks that were there, put those across the front of the fire to make a sort of a raised bed or bench or something like that over where our campsite was, and then make fire on top of that so it would reflect heat inside our chamber. And for an hour I was feeding this thing, feeding it, and it would not self-sustain, just kept dwindling out. It was so moist, so wet there. Everything we found was wet and cold, and could not get anything to sustain for burning. And I kind of called over because I couldn't really see Steve's camp section. I knew I could see his smoke, so I knew he had some kind of fire going on, and he could see mine. And I call over there, I'm like, Steve, man, is your fire alright? How's it doing? He's like, yeah, man, my fire's pretty good. So I'm like, alright, good. Steve's got a self-sustaining fire. I can just leave this one. We'll channel all the wood to one fire, and that'll be our one shot, and we'll boil up some water, heat up that way, and stuff like that. So I sort of, at this point, I'm like, okay, I gotta change clothes. Like, I'm super wet, super cold. I'd been kneeling on the snow for about an hour trying to get stupid fire to self-sustain. So my pants were soaking wet, and my knees are like freezing cold. And I'm like, hey Jay, I'm going in the shelter. I gotta change up, man. I'm like super cold. So go inside the shelter. Inside the shelter, it was at this point about -4, and we're probably at about 5 p.m. something like that. We still have some sun, but I didn't know if we'd have much more, maybe till 6 o'clock, something like that. So I'm in there, and super freezing cold. I know we don't have a fire for our shelter, and at this point, I don't even know if Steve's fire is going to self-sustain, and I'm feeling super guilty because I've never stayed out in the snow before, and I've never been wet and completely exhausted from a 5-hour hike, and in a shelter, basically Jimmy rigged together out of garbage bags and a tarp, and I didn't know if that shelter was going to be warm enough for us to actually survive in there. So even though now I know that we're going to be fine, because obviously hindsight's 20/20, at that point I was feeling really guilty, and it was a little bit of sort of fear for my own safety, but it's mostly like, you know, it's my fault. I brought these people up here, and I was feeling like super guilty that my brother would die and my 2 cousins. And before we started this, my mom said, you know, like, oh, bring your other cousins along, and it was just mostly transport is the reason why I didn't get more people to come. And then I was up there, I'm like, man, I'm glad none of my other cousins are up here, so I would have felt even more guilty, and that was like a really sort of tough moment when we were up there. I was just like, you know, whatever, gotta keep going, gotta keep pushing, and basically we have to make it through this. So I'm inside the tarp. It's about -4 or so, and I'm like, okay, gotta change all my clothes. Like, my clothes are soaking wet, I'm damp, I'm sitting there, I'm already shivering, everything's shivering on me, I just can't stop. And I'm just like, okay, I gotta change clothes, but I knew I didn't even want to take my clothes off because I didn't want to be any colder than I was at that moment. But every single survival sort of person or whatever always advises when you have your wet clothes to try to change into dry clothes. So take off my toque, and immediately all the heat I had sort of stored under there just boom zips off, and I have my wet hair. I'm just like, oh, start chilling and start freezing even more. Take off my shamog. Put that to the side. All the heat on my neck's gone. I'm like, oh, it's freezing. Unzip my hoodie, take off my wet hoodie, take off my t-shirt, because I just had a t-shirt. So I'm just sitting there completely wet still, trying to let the moisture evaporate off me as much as possible. Freezing cold, soaking wet. I grabbed my shamog, kind of wipe off a bit, try to get as dry as possible. Then I had Under Armour tucked away in a sort of a side pocket in a dry bag. Put that on, thank goodness that was still dry. But it's freezing cold because, of course, the Under Armour's been sitting in -4 weather, so it doesn't feel warm at first. I put it on and it's like, oh my gosh, this is cold. And a few seconds later, I have my new hoodie on. New hoodie, same thing. It's -4 degrees itself, and it slowly starts to warm up from my body temperature and body heat. and it got a little bit warmer. I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh, this is a little bit better. Put my shemagh back on, put the toque back on, do the same thing with my pants, take off the wet pants, transfer into Under Armour, some different pants, and actually it was the same pants. Yeah, I had basically the Under Armour that I put on in between, but I still have my wet military khakis. And I'm sitting there and still freezing, still have no idea if we're going to make it through the night, of how cold it is, if we're just going to dip and become hypothermic and slowly die. You know, sitting there and I look in the thermometer, and the thermometer rose up to -1, and I've never been happier to be -1. I was like, yes, and there's no wind chill in there, and I slowly start to warm up. And I was probably in the shelter for about 20 minutes just because it was so much warmer than outside. I just didn't want to go back outside. I was actually in there so long that my brother was a little bit concerned, and he called over. He's like, Cam, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, man, I'm just changing clothes, I'm alright. He's like, okay, cool. So that was kind of nice. And then once I sort of got my core temperature a little bit better, my legs are still super freezing cold, and my arms and my hands and stuff were pretty cold. But my core temperature was feeling a lot more stable, a lot better. And I was like, okay, I think I'm alright. So I go back outside. It's probably about 5:30, something like that. Outside temperatures around -5 or so, something like that, because it dropped a little bit while I was in the shelter. Sun's still out. And I go over to Steve's shelter thing, and I'm looking at it, and he's still fanning the fire. And it's been about, I don't know, close to 2 hours now, because I let my fire drop at 1 hour and then sort of focused mainly on the shelter and got in there and stuff like that. And Steve's still fanning away, still feeding little shavings of the standing dead wood tree in there. And I'm like, oh my gosh, man, because I thought this was supposed to be the fire that was supposed to be the sustained one. Like, when I asked him, he said the fire's doing good. I'm like looking at this thing, and I didn't say it, but I'm like, this thing does not look like it's doing good. I'm like, oh my gosh. But we managed to get our cups in there. I asked my brother and my cousin again, my cousin Dave, and I'm like, oh dude, it's like, where are your mugs? Like, we gotta boil some water up. I got mine going, and Steve's got his going, so you should guys get yours and get them on fire, get some tea brewing up here. And they're like, oh dude, like, we didn't bring stuff to boil water in. And I'm like, dudes, like, I gave you lists extensively of things to bring, and definitely mentioned something to boil water in a few times. But they didn't have any. And we didn't have access to the river. So there was a river flowing there, but when we went up to it, it was probably about a 30-foot drop, kind of ravine down into the river, all of snow, all of trees and sticks and stuff like that, to get down to the river. And we sort of ventured up on top of the peak to try to get to the river and look down in there, and just realized that it was probably too treacherous, and it'd be, you know, we're 5 hours away from help at this point. It's just too big of a risk to try to get down to the river, so we decided just to boil snow. And for those of you who've boiled snow for water, you know it sucks. And it did suck. You're super thirsty, you want some water, you want something heated up, nice and warm to drink, and you put in your first mug full of snow, and what you get out of that full mug when it's compressed and packed down is basically about a quarter of the amount you put in. So we put that in, that sucked, and then with that little bit of water, it makes the next boil go a little bit better. So fill it back up again, you get about 50% back out of your container, and then the last one you pretty much get all of it back, so think about 3 melting cycles, but it takes a long time for all the heat to get into the snow to melt it. So we're sitting there, you know, kind of shivering away. Finally get the mugs melted, and make some tea, drink that, it's nice and warm. Steve actually had to transfer his fires. One fire he made burnt into the snow about 2 feet down, and it's getting so far that he was getting hard that he had to bend down to put sticks and stuff in there, so we had to transfer out the burning logs that we had to a new fire pile, and then start burning that one. That one burnt probably near a foot down into the snow. And it's kind of amazing, because I've always sort of, on YouTube and whatnot, seen that it's pretty hard to make a fire on the snow, and you should try to dig down to the ground level as much as possible, but we didn't have that option. So we did have it functional. Steve had that one burning, and I had mine burning. It's just you had to keep feeding them. And then at one point, we're kind of all drinking the tea and having a good time and chatting, and it's probably about 6 o'clock. We're about dusk right now, so still tiny little bit of sun peeking over. And we look down, the fire is like almost gone, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I had a little bit of this 151, and I didn't really want to drink it because I was super dehydrated and I just didn't feel like drinking at that point. So I was like, you know, like I could try putting the 151 on the fire, and then everyone's like, oh, don't do that, like it's too risky, the moisture could put the fire out, and I'm like, yeah, you're right, it could. But we didn't really have any options, and when it got really down, it was almost out, I poured some 151 sort of around the fire, so it wasn't actually contacting the flame, and just kind of on the wood, and then I guess the vapors from that, after they vaporized and came up a bit, just boom, the whole thing lit up and engulfed in fire, and then we were able to put some more sticks on there and get it a little bit better. Burned it for a long time. Finally, after probably 2.5 hours, we had enough hot cold sort of bed in the bottom that the fire was a little bit more self-sustaining. We only had to feed it a little bit, which is nice. We stayed up till probably about 11 o'clock at night, trying to get as warm as possible, but it's still pretty cold, eating some chocolate bars and telling some stories about how the day was going. And my brother at one point, he's super wet still and super kind of like cranky and stuff like that, and we're all kind of a little bit, you know, worn out and snappy and stuff. And he's like, dude, like 2 hours ago I really hated you. And I'm like, me too, man. I'm sorry. I thought possibly we might die up here. He's like, yeah, I was pretty scared too. And we're sort of, after we had some food and we had some warm tea and stuff like that, we were feeling a little bit better. So that was good. It was kind of a funny moment. We all started laughing after he said that. So it wasn't like a mean thing. It was just in good spirits. It was kind of funny. And then in the night, in the day we've seen a little bit of an avalanche area. So I was a little bit frightful of avalanches, because basically we were in a bowl. It's just a big snow bowl, and at any point some snow could come down and get us, so it's a little bit cautious about that, kind of, you know, not like paranoid, but kind of thinking about it back in my mind, but I didn't really think that much about it. And during the day when we got there, I was so tired and just had to eat right away. All I had that on me that was really fast was like a can of Spam, so I cracked open a can of Spam. That was at 4. Started eating it right away. Ate about half a can, and it was super salty and like, nah, not very good. And then ate sort of 75% of it, still had a quarter can left, and I'm like, okay, yes, I can't eat anymore, it's too salty. Packed it away in my pocket, completely forgot about it. And we're sitting in the shelter, and I'm still feeling pretty cold, my legs are cold and stuff like that, but when we were talking it was alright, and we talked for a little bit, and we decided to go to bed around 11:30, something like that. With the 3 of us in there, myself, my brother, and my cousin Dave, we had the shelter at about -1 the entire night, which is probably the perfect temperature, because any warmer and the snow we were sitting on, because kind of behind us, could have melted down and soaked us, so it's probably good that it stayed -1. And we get tired, we started going to bed, and once we sort of lay down, stopped moving around and exhaling and having all the energy in the tent, it sort of cooled off in there, and I started getting really cold again, and shivering a little bit, and my knees are still wet, and my legs are still really, really cold, and I'm inside my sleeping bag, and sort of tuck my head inside the sleeping bag, because it was one of the mummy bag style ones. Fantastic sleeping bag, by the way. I'll do a review on that later on. And I tuck into there, start sleeping, and I'm also really scared of bears, because there were reports of bears up there. Like a few different campers reported bears and stuff like that. And we didn't hang any bear bags, which is really stupid. But we were just so cold and tired and exhausted and hungry, and had to work on our shelters and our fires so much that we basically didn't even consider doing the bear bags at all, and had our food sort of just in our bags outside of the tent we're in. So if anything came, we would just eat the bags and then leave us alone, hopefully. But we're still pretty frightened about cougars and bears. And in the middle of the night, I hear this sort of weird sound. It's like, and I'm like, what is that? It freaks me out, and I kind of get up, whatever, and I rummage over my bag. I find my knife, unsheathed that halfway, had it right next to me, had the pepper spray open, or ready to go to, with the safety off. But I'm thinking, we're inside the shelter. If I blast the pepper spray in here, we're all going to get maced, and that's going to be pretty bad, so I didn't want to do that. But still, like, you know, kind of like in panic mode, kind of like, you know, defense mode. And sort of realized that's just my cousin's nose. And I'm like, what is that? You guys do that? And my cousin Dave's like, oh yeah, sorry man, that's my nose. I got a clogged nose. And we all kind of had clogged noses because it was cold up there. And so we kind of tried to get back to sleep. And about 12 o'clock, I hear something else. It's like grrr, grrr. I'm like, oh man, it's a bear. That's super close. I'm like, what the heck? I grab my knife, because I'm like, man, if bear comes at me, I'm just gonna probably won't do very well, but you know, try to stab him in the face with a knife. And again, it's my cousin, same cousin Dave, and it's his stomach growling. I guess he was hungry or something like that. I was like, oh frick. So I fall back to sleep. I didn't really fall asleep. The entire night I didn't sleep. I kind of just was drifting in and out of consciousness, different states of consciousness kind of thing. And probably about 12:30, I hear this loud rumbling sound. It's like kind of, that's not how it sounded, but it sounded like a loud rumbling. And I'm like, oh man, this better not be an avalanche. But at this point, I'm just so tired. And I know there's no way we'd be able to run on the bolt anyway. So if there was an avalanche, we'd just have to either, hopefully it would miss us or it was going to bury us. So I'm just like, whatever. Hopefully it's not an avalanche. Hopefully it won't hit us. And then I kind of hear this this sound that I recognized from being a jet. So I knew it was a jet flying over, not an avalanche, which is great. I guess it was sort of the sound of the engine cutting out and then turning back on or something like that, like a or something, I don't know, something that sounded like a jet. I can't remember what it sounds like now, but I knew it was a jet. So that made me pretty happy. So I start tucking her off again. I put my hand in my pocket, and I feel the Spam, and I'm like, oh man, the Spam's here. But at this point, I'm pretty hungry, and I think it's kind of funny, because I'm like, oh man, we were so paranoid with the bears, and here I am sitting with a can of Spam in my pocket inside the tent, which is probably pretty smelly for a bear, because they probably have good noses. So I'm kind of in my sleeping bag still, and I start munching on the Spam, I'm like, Spam, eating that. And then I take the can, and I'm like, okay, I gotta get this can away from us, so I throw it outside. I was like, ding, 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 and my brother kind of jerks up, says, dude, what's that? I'm like, oh man, don't worry, I threw a can outside. He's like, oh, frick, I thought it was a bear. I thought it was like getting into our cans or food. I'm like, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot I had that, you know, Spam in there. That was kind of funny. That's sort of everything that happened in the night, and I kind of tuck her off again, and probably about from that point, it's 2 hours from that point, so I've been in my sleeping bag for probably about an hour, from 11 to 12, and then it's still pretty wet and cold. My knees are wet, and my core temperature was decent, but not fully warm, and then my extremities are pretty cold. And after about 2 hours, so probably be about 2 o'clock in the morning, I was feeling pretty warm, pretty toasted, pretty good. I'm like, oh, I feel pretty good. I sort of tuck her off a little bit more, but I'm still kind of a little bit conscious because I never slept through the whole night. After an hour after that, so probably about 3 o'clock in the morning, I wake up and I'm super hot. I'm actually sweating. I'm so hot inside the sleeping bag. Sorry, camera cut out there. Wasn't sure what I was talking about there now. Had to find some new batteries. But I guess we slept there the night, and it was super warm. The sleeping bag was amazing. And I wake up in the morning. It's probably about, I can't remember what time it was when I woke up, but maybe 7, 8, can't remember. It's on video, you got to see it in a second. And we wake up, and the other two are still kind of sleeping, and there's some water on me, and when I was opening the tarp, I was actually in such a sort of a panic that I cut the tarp a little bit, and right over me, that's where it was, ironically, it started dripping on me, stuff like that. So a little bit wet, and the outside of the tarp, you can kind of see there's frozen bits, and on my boots there's frozen bits, and my boots are inside the tent as well. So it was pretty cold in the tent itself, because there's water still freezing. And I checked, and it was, I think in the morning, about -2, so a little bit colder than when we went to bed at first at -1. And in the night it was supposed to be apparently -7, so I think it's probably that or colder, but pretty cold. But I wake up in the morning, I'm feeling pretty good, sun's out, it's a beautiful, gorgeous day. I can kind of have my camera, I'm peeking outside, looking out there, and I look over, my cousin Steve's already awake, which is great, because actually, none of us talked to him in the middle of the night, so we were all kind of afraid that he'd like get too cold and then wouldn't be able to get help, and then like fall asleep and like die from hypothermia. Actually, throughout the entire night until I got warm in my sleeping bag, I was really concerned that our core temperatures would just keep plummeting and plummeting, and slowly we'd kind of burn out, because we're so exhausted. And it was a major hike. Like, I was super tired from that hike, from the 5-hour hike up there. I look over at my brother. He's soaking wet, and right above him there was the stick that was kind of holding it from the inside, I guess, poked through the tent. I didn't know that, and the condensation from our breath and stuff like that was on the tent and was dripping down, hitting him all night. and he was kind of, there's no place he could go because inside the small shelter was so cramped that we were basically shoulder to shoulder. At one point, my arm was so sore because he was kind of pinning against it, but he was so warm that I didn't want to move. That's how cold it was. So I sacrificed the pain of my arm and like the pins and the needles and like being super uncomfortable for probably about an hour just because being next to him was warm. So that happened. That's kind of nice that he was there. And then I started talking in the morning. I'm like, hey man, like, how'd you sleep? Because I slept really well. I was really warm, so I was expecting the air to be warm too. And Dave is pretty cold, but his bag stayed dry. And Josh, his bag soaked through, and he was pretty cold. So I'm like, do you want me to put the Mylar on you? And like, I have another sheet if you want. He's like, no, I'm just gonna stay here for a bit. And he's super cold. So I just opened up the Mylar anyway, because at a second I had the SOL Escape Bivy, and I kind of forgot I had it in the night. But open that up, spread that across him, so he's in the sleeping bag. He has the Escape Bivy on top of him. Then I take my sleeping bag, put my sleeping bag on top of him too, to try to get him as warm as possible. And then I kind of climb out of the tent and go start chatting with my cousin Steve. And I'm like, hey man, like, how'd you do last night? He's like, oh, I slept amazing, I did great. Big smile on his face, just having the time of his life. While the three of us were all like, oh man, we're gonna die out here, so cold. But as I said, he is from the Yukon, so he's used to like -40 or something like that. So he was alright. And he's already has the fire going again. He's cooking some stuff up. And he's like, yeah, last night I was gonna mess with you guys. I was gonna go over and make bear sounds. And I'm like, dude, you don't even know, like, if you ever made bear sounds, I would have maced you, like, hardcore. Because I was so kind of, like, paranoid about bears and stuff like that. He's like, oh yeah, I thought about that and decided not to come over. So that was good. But yeah. So some of you guys may be, you know, thinking, like, oh, that wasn't near death. Like, I've been through way worse than that. And that's not really, like, the point. The point is, when you're not sure about what's going on and you feel that you're going to die, or there's possibility that someone you care about is going to be hurt, you know, you really kind of go into panic mode. And sort of, one, it tests your might kind of thing, not might, but it tests your reaction, what you're going to do, if you're going to freeze up and panic, or if you're going to take action and kind of, you know, correct what's going on. So I'm glad that we all sort of worked well as a team and pulled together. That was great. And secondly, it kind of gives you a perspective on things. You know, you go back to your regular job and your regular life and stuff like that, and just opens your eyes and gives you a nice sort of appreciation for the people in your lives. And